Lauren here from Genesis Tutoring. Today we're going to be focusing on one of the extremely difficult and challenging questions from Unit 11 of Khan Academy. It is this question right here. I'm bringing it into a whiteboard and removing the answer choices so that we're forced to read the text critically, come up with our own ideal answer, and then compare the answers to our ideal answer. Because I feel that with questions like this, if you don't invent your own answer first, the power of suggestion from the answer choices can guide you in the wrong direction if you're not taking the time to read the text critically. Okay, so coming up with your own answer forces you and compels you to read the text with a higher level of analysis. Okay, great. Let's read the question first. According to the text, Fearon suggests that recurrent war would undermine rationalist models only if which of the following conditions are met. So in other words, the question is, Fearon believes that if we have a lot of war, then the rationalists are wrong only if what? What would make the rationalists wrong? Assuming that we also had recurrent war. And I don't know what the rationalists would be wrong about because I haven't read the text yet. But I know that the rationalists believe something and that if there were recurrent war, it wouldn't be enough to make them wrong. There would need to be another condition that would need to be met in order for them to be wrong, and we need to figure out what that condition is. Advocates for the rationalist school in international relations theory contain that because war is so costly, states should always reach settlements that avoid conflict. So in baby words, what that's saying, if we read it again, is that people who are part of this big rational school, theory school, they believe that since the war is really expensive, or since wars are expensive in general, we should always try to make a deal or reach a settlement instead of conflict. So rationalists believe that since war is expensive, its states should make deals instead of fight. Cool, makes sense. While the ubiquity of warfare ostensibly refutes this model, James Fearon maintains that the perceived paradox is predicated upon idealized baseline conditions rarely ever in effect. So even as I read that for the first time, to be honest with you, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm going to have to read it again. Okay? So if we start from the beginning here, while the ubiquity of warfare, so like the presence of warfare, the fact that it's very, very common, there's a lot of it, it seems, or it ostensibly refutes this model. So in other words, the fact that war happens so often, it seems to prove this theory wrong. Because the theory is that, well, war is so costly, why don't you just make a deal? Well, there's a lot of warfare, so clearly the theory's wrong because there's so much of it, is what they're saying, okay? Now, Fearon is saying that this is only a perceived paradox, so it only looks like a contradiction, or in other words, it only looks like we're going against what the rationalists think. And the reason why he thinks we're not actually going against what the rationalists think is because their idea is based upon these ideal conditions that are necessary in order to make a deal that are like rarely ever met. So in other words, James is like, sure, yeah, we could have very little war and make deals all the time, but you would need these very, very idealistic conditions to be met, and we don't know what they are, but they're very rarely in effect. And since those conditions, whatever they may be, are rarely in effect, we don't have the opportunity to get the deals that we want, and that's why we have a ton of war. Okay? So, if we're going to summarize that, there is so much war, though, so it looks like the rationalists are wrong. Fearon says this only seems like a contradiction. And the reason it's not, because the rationalists believe in deals under very specific conditions that are rarely ever met or in existence. So deals can't be made. All right? When strategic incentives compel concealment or misrepresentation of information, when shifting powers render promises precarious, or when contested stakes defy divisible allocation, conflict emerges not as a lapse in logic, but as a rational response to these irremediable environmental factors. All right, so what is that saying? At the start, it's saying sometimes countries have these like strategic incentives or these reasons that they should be hiding information or misrepresenting information, or sometimes like the power balance, so the shifting balance of powers, it makes promises really hard to trust. Or sometimes when contested stakes, so whatever you were fighting over is really difficult to like split up fairly, conflict emerges. I mean, that makes sense, right? So it says states have reasons to hide or lie, right? Power is not balanced and promises aren't kept. And things aren't divided fairly. That's when conflict emerges. That's when we fight. And it's not because we're stupid or illogical. It's actually a rational response to these irremediable or unfixable environmental frictions. And it's not because we are illogical. It's because these issues, which are called environmental frictions, according to the text, are not fixable, and it makes sense to fight them. Okay, so the question, again, is asking, if we have a lot of war, then the rationalists are wrong only if what? So right now we do have a lot of war, but the rationalists aren't necessarily wrong. And the reason why they're not necessarily wrong is because we have all of these other reasons. So it was like lying or power imbalance that forced us to fight and makes it impossible to make a deal. So if we want the rationalists to be wrong, we would have to show that those issues are not in effect. So like we don't have promises that are being broken. We don't have issues dividing things up between places. We don't have issues hiding information or lying. And yet, if we're missing all of those terrible things and we still choose not to settle, then the rationalists would be wrong. And that's the answer that I'm looking for. So I'm going to create my perfect response right here. Okay, so the answer I'm inventing and the answer I'm going to look for and compare myself to would be recurrent war, which is part of the question right there, would show the rationalists are wrong if none of the environmental frictions were an issue and we still didn't make a deal. So what are the environmental frictions? So if no lying or hiding happened and we still didn't make a deal, but that's actually going too far. We don't need to add, and this, we're still not making a deal. They just want to know what would be the condition for the rationalists to be wrong. So if you had recurrent war, no lying or hiding was happening, and yet the war was going on, why is the war going on? We should just settle. There's no lying, there's no hiding, we should just settle. Let's look for that. The costs of conflict are low enough that states no longer prioritize reaching a negotiated settlement. Okay, I'm looking for no lying or hiding. That doesn't really capture it. I might go back to it, but it doesn't scream to me no lying or hiding. I might, if all of them seem wrong or all of them seem right, or maybes, I'm going to go back, but it doesn't say no lying or hiding. Each side is prevented from exchanging relevant information through established bargaining channels. That seems like hiding. I'm looking for no hiding, no lying. The environmental frictions identified by Fearon are shown to be the primary drivers of modern international conflict. So that's maybe true of the text, that the environmental frictions, so like lying and hiding, are the reason that we fight. Yeah, that's true. But again, think about what the question is asking. They're saying, what would need to happen for the rationalists to be wrong? The rationalists believe that if you can settle, then you could. Then you should. If you can settle, then you definitely should settle. So what would prove them wrong? That we could settle and we didn't. Rivals are able to share information openly and depend on future agreements being carried out as promised. Okay, so we're able to talk to each other openly. That sounds like no lying. That's good. And depend on future agreements being carried out as promised. So promises, yes, no lying. That's the one. It's D. I hope this made some sense to you guys or helped you piece apart what this complicated text is saying. And, oh, ran into an error. Well, this is the right answer. Can't prove it to you, but I assure you that it is the right answer. And if you need any more support, you can reach out to me at Genesis Tutoring. Again, my name is Lauren. Thank you, guys.